I'm now delighted to introduce you to Katie Shern, who's going to chair this next panel, which is going to be brilliant. I have to say I'm very excited. So we've heard a bit around the need to change cultural norms, to shift our mindsets, our ideologies, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the next hour with this fantastic group of people. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Katie. All good? Excellent. And tech's all been sorted apparently, so you can relax.
Thank you, Eve. No pressure. Going to be brilliant, apparently. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Katie. I'm a researcher at Sheffield Hallam University. I'm fairly tall. My spirit animal is a giraffe because of my extremely long neck. And I have slightly more bags under my eyes than usual because I've had the pleasure of being in Chicago last week, where I was on an academic, very geeky academic conference. And so, but it's my very, very great pleasure to be with you today. I think this is my fourth GM Moving conference, and each year it gets bigger and more exciting. So really pleased to be with you. As Eve has mentioned, what we're going to be talking today is more about the way we think about moving, the ideas that we share, the beliefs that we have about moving, and sometimes the beliefs that we have about inactivity that can really hold our ideas, our plans to be more active back, so it can get in the way. And so we've got this onion diagram which shows all of those different layers of the things that may need to change to really, really realise our ambition to have a healthy, active population. But what we just highlighted there is that top one, the culture, the norms and the ideologies, which is a fancy word of just saying our ideas and our shared beliefs that may make it more difficult for us to be active. So I mentioned that I've just been in Chicago, and it was really noticeable to me that actually the idea of being quick and getting around quickly actually takes away from our sort of opportunities for walking or for rolling or for cycling. You know, every opportunity there was an escalator or a travelator where there could have been, more opportunities for greater distances. So this is one of those ideas that may hold things in place. I'm going to introduce our panel, and they're going to just quickly introduce themselves and describe themselves, and then also introduce to you one of those sticky beliefs that gets in the way of us moving more as a population. They're going to do it quite quickly, and whilst they're doing that, I want you to really listen, but also to think about what of those ideas that you are aware of or that even you hold yourself that may get in the way. And then after that, we're going to go to Menti. So for those of you that haven't joined the Menti yet, the number is up there on the board. I'll also read it out. It's 8591738. So just get ready there, and in a few moments you'll have your chance to put your sticky belief that gets in the way of us moving there. So my great pleasure to first of all introduce to you Anna-Marie Phelps, who is here from the International Working Group for Women and Girls. Anna-Marie, what's your sticky belief?
Hi, Katie, and thank you. My sticky belief, and it's one my mother always used to say when I was growing up, was you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I sort of interpret this as, we can easily blame the individual for their choice to be active or inactive. And I think it's really reinforced by the I don't mentality quite often. So I don't have time, I don't have money, I don't have the right kit. So that would be mine.
Anna-Marie, thank you. Dr. Doug Jeffrey, who's from the Manchester Local Care Organisation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My sticky belief is, I should introduce myself first. I'm a GP and I work for the Manchester Local Care Organisation, more of that later. I've got white hair and a white t-shirt and the appearance of an ageing Scottish buffoon. My sticky belief is that when you have a health problem, you should be wrapped up in cotton wool.
Thank you, Doug, and more on that later. May I now turn to Hayley Lever, who some of you may know is the Chief Executive of GM Moving.
Hi, yeah, so thanks. Great to be back this afternoon. My sticky belief, my eldest daughter turned 21 last weekend, and I was thinking about some of the things I heard when I was first pregnant, about how the expectation, I won't name who said this, that I bloody well hope you're going to give up that running now you're pregnant.
Right, yeah, fun. That's an interesting one there. We won't quiz you on who it was that said that, Hayley. Let's turn now to Jeanette Bain-Barnett from Sport England.
Hi everyone. Yes, so my name is Jeanette. I have chocolate brown skin and I've got curly hair, which is not originally mine because one of my best friends put it in last night.
Wow.
I'm wearing a This Girl Can t-shirt because I work for Sport England, and I have a wonky foot, so I've got a bandage on my foot. My sticky belief is trust the process. I just don't believe it.
Okay, right. It's an amazing one. We'll get into that in a little while. I'm going to now turn to Sarah Brown-Fraser from Activity Alliance.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Brown-Fraser. I'm the Head of Communications for Activity Alliance. My sticky belief is accessibility is expensive.
Okay, excellent. Yes, very thought-provoking already. And some clapping from the audience there. We can have clapping at any point, actually. You know, there's a few egos up here on the stage, so any clapping is welcome. So thank you very much. And last but not least, I'd love to introduce Tim Gill, who is the author of Urban Playground.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. You're listening to a white man who mostly wears blue. And I like to think I've got salt and pepper hair, but it's probably more salt than pepper these days. And I fly the flag for children's everyday freedoms, for the freedom to play out and get around. And my sticky belief is that kids today don't want to play out and don't want to walk and cycle and get around under their own steam. Thank you.
Brilliant, Tim. So hopefully that's a bit thought-provoking for you all. So just give you a moment now in the audience, because this is a panel, but it's also really to try and stimulate some thinking for you in the audience as well. So please do turn to your neighbour or go to the Menti to just type in for us your sticky belief or that kind of commonly held worldview or idea that gets in the way of people being active or being more active. And I can see we've got some flashing of this screen, so we may or may not be able to see the results collectively, but hopefully we will. Rest assured that if we don't see them up there on the screen, that we'll be able to produce that word cloud and share that with others at the end of the conference or following the conference. So do go ahead and type those in, but also feel free to chat to the person next to you for a couple of moments while we wait. So I'll just give you another 30 seconds to continue talking or to get those beliefs into that word cloud. You have to suspend, know that it's there, even if we can't see. Oh, here we go. So the words, because there's lots of contributions, the words are getting smaller. So I'll start to read out for those of you. We've got things like everyone is equal. We've got it's expensive to be active. We've got things like green spaces are free. So that's an interesting one, Tim, you might notice. We've got ones around also similar to Hayley's. You can't cycle when pregnant. You notice that not enough time and not fit enough coming up there as much. So lots of ideas coming through, and they're just really coming through so quickly now that it's moving quite rapidly. It's hard for me to keep up. But I'll just come into the middle now, so just bear with me. And one thing that I notice as it goes through are a couple of comments, Anna-Marie, on women there. So women can't do as much. Are women safe? Those things that are really, perhaps, speak to you in terms of your role as the International Women's and Girls Group. So can you tell us any more about your sticky belief and anything that's really got in the way of the work that you do?
There's a million ways and a million things I want to say about this. But I think that there's a sort of personal belief bit, which we need to help people break out of. But there's also an awful lot that we in the environment, in the community, in the family, in everything we do, and we'll come to this, can do to help people to break out of it. Because I think, there is generally a belief that women don't want to, and therefore they find reasons why they can't. They don't have enough time, whatever. And we need to help people to understand that if they make time, if you prioritize it and you make time, you become much better at doing all the other things in life. You really do become more efficient. You do, thank you. I'll pay you later. You do, you will be better at what you do. You will feel better. You'll walk better. You'll be more confident and all those things. So I think from a women's perspective, it's all these expectations around women not being sporty, not having time, putting other people first, putting their children first, that really deter them. And they'll often use money or time or other as an excuse when actually, we don't particularly need kit of any sort to be active. And we're talking about activity here, and some people's activity is sport and some people's activity is just other stuff, just keeping moving around, as we've all seen this morning.
So it's a little bit about, making sure it is high on the priority list. But you also mentioned something about what we can do, more generally to make women feel included.
I think in families, quite often you'll see on a Sunday morning, the dad's taking the kids out to the park and mum's at home cooking lunch, and it, really always frustrates me if there isn't a mum there. In that family group, or whatever else. So I think there's a lot we can do. I think we need to stop talking. I mean, for women particularly, we need to stop talking to women about this. We need to talk to more men. We need many more male allies. We need all the guys that are out there to be encouraging their girls, their daughters. And we're seeing some really good work at the moment. A great campaign Women in Sport are doing about Boys Will Be Boys, trying to encourage boys from the really youngest age to acknowledge that their sisters actually are as good at sport as they are and as capable of being active as they are. So, the family bit is really important, and really important to a lot of women that are in family groups or in small community groups. And I think that's where that sort of personal ownership, regardless of what you consider your gender is, to look at everybody around you and make sure that they've got that opportunity.
Thank you, Anna-Marie. Hayley, can I bring you in actually just on that, because we're talking about women, and you mentioned specifically around pregnancy. Is there anything you want to build up on that idea?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all of that I can relate. And I guess from a culture point of view, if I just reflect on 21 years as a parent, do you know how much has changed in the cultural norms around women as parents? In my experience, for it being a really positive, thanks to this Girl Can, not in small measure, really changing the dialogue around what it is to be a woman, and that we can be strong and we can prioritise and put our health and our physical activity first, because everything else flows from being well. So the cultural norms and the language, and it's subject of many of a sort of dinner table conversation over the years of, how much those small shifts in what we say and what we think, and how we influence each other, make a massive difference when that population sort of scale. But it needs the campaigns, it needs people to see things on the TV, it needs a GP consensus statement, it needs all of the kind of policy and cultural stuff around it, so that that individual who said to me, I hope you're going to stop running now, wouldn't say it, because everywhere they looked they would see really positive messages and evidence-based stuff around how brilliant it is to keep moving when you're pregnant. So it can be about what we tell ourselves. It's so much more powerful when it's everything that society is telling us is that it's a good thing to keep moving.
Thank you. I think that's a really excellent point. So for people who weren't able to hear the point being made, it was highlighting that that there are perhaps some differences between people with regards to what they can do, and some of those may be related to being a woman or being a man, and that we can acknowledge that there are differences. I think with respect that what's being suggested here on the stage is not that everybody can do everything, but that we should have a society that acknowledges movement being important for everyone, to be able to find movement that does work for them. So thank you very much for your point. I think that is a really excellent point to be made, but also to recognise that we're not saying that everybody's going to be an international rugby player. It's more about trying to find opportunities for people to be active in ways that they value, and that they are supported to do that. Does that sum up your point? Yes, it does. Yeah. Thank you. No, it's very helpful to make that clarification. Yes, thank you. Okay, I think there are lots of differences amongst us as well that would mean that some people can do some things and some people can't. So let's acknowledge that, but also to recognise that we would try to find a form of movement that works for everybody. I think it's a good time though, because thinking about the sort of medicalisation perhaps of pregnancy, you know, in terms of some of the feedback that you might have had. If I can bring Doug in to just reflect on your role as a doctor and what you may have heard about the role of activity or not in the case of certain illnesses that you work with.
Yes, thank you. I'm still sadly reflecting the fact I'll never be an international golfer. The reason I wanted to discuss the idea of people thinking they need to be wrapped in cotton wool is twofold, really. One is the part of on behalf of patients or people's ideas of how they should behave with illness. So the thing, for instance, we know that the best thing if you've got osteoarthritis in your knee is to keep your muscles strong, and it holds the joint firmly and stops it rattling around, stops it progressing. And that's nothing to do with doctoring or paracetamol or anything else. Or for instance, if you've had a heart attack, it's say you want to not have another heart attack, by far the best thing is to change your behavior or try to be more active. But often doctors can be a big part of the problem. So the way they use language or can use language, they're much more confident in prescribing medication or giving explanations of blocked arteries or wear and tear in the joints. And they're not so confident on the softer other determinants of health. So because they're not so confident, it gets neglected. And likewise, some of the things we tell people will say, don't fly for 6 weeks. But we don't say why. It's not because you're going to break or pop or split. It's because there's a real risk of a clot if you were to fly initially. After that, crack on. And it's that kind of language, that kind of confidence that we need to get our doctors to be a bit better at it as well, I think.
And that. Yes, Tim.
Come in on
do
the
come
point
in,
about,
yes.
about risk and safety, and I've actually got some good news for people here. And the questions around the overprotection of children and links with what we allow children to do when they're playing out and all that. It's been a sort of a topic I've been focusing on for a long time, along with others. And over the years, I think there's been growing awareness that well-meaning attempts to keep children safe are actually being counterproductive. And the good news is that you know, the pendulum has been swinging back in favour of a balanced approach to risk for some time. And the latest expression of that is an international standard. Sounds quite geeky and anarchy, but this is ISO, the body that sets standards that have to be followed by businesses and sectors all around the world. And it's ISO 4980, benefit risk assessment in sports and recreation. Okay, so it's specifically aimed at promoting a balanced approach to risk in all of the topics areas that many people are working in here today. And it says, don't just focus on the risks. Don't just focus on the bad things that might happen. Focus on the benefits, whether that's, you know, joint improvement or just general levels of physical activity, well-being, all the rest of it. That is now a benchmark that's out there that was published 6 months ago that everyone in this room can refer to start to really have a kind of authoritative response to some of those safety fears and excessive risk aversion.
So it's interesting, I think, Tim, just to bring the audience back to your role, thinking about the outdoor environment and the sort of the opportunities for particularly young people, children and young people to be active, that you've seen a pendulum shift from a risk averse to more of a balanced understanding of that. Doug, back to you. Do you see there's anything similar in terms of that recognition of, you know, taking the overly risk averse versus something which is more balanced is also happening in the medical field?
I'm optimistic that we're getting more sensible about how we engage and explain and explore people's health issues with them, more culturally sensitive, but also more practical. And partly to do with the limits that are put upon us by finance and everything else. Actually, it's cheaper and more effective and better for everyone if we can get people moving, if they can stay healthier and happier. Just to reflect on your point about playgrounds, I had my children quite late and my brother had them quite early, and he came to the playground with me when mine were toddlers, and I said, oh, is it like when you were a kid? And he said, well, no, when I was here before, everyone sat on benches and now everyone follows the children around. And he really could see the difference in society in that as a year. So it'd be very interesting to see if that can be turned around.
Yeah, I think I recognise that from when my children were more, because I wanted to get involved and play on the things they were playing with and have a legitimate excuse to do so. Sarah, may I bring you in, because Doug mentioned there about not just the sort of cultural attitude, but perhaps that assumption that if we are going to make things accessible, then it's going to cost, and your myth was that it's necessarily more expensive. Can you just give us a bit more detail on why you selected that and how you've experienced that in your role?
Yeah, and I'm head of communications, so a lot of my work is about accessible communications, and the amount of times, if I had £1 for every time somebody said I can't afford that, or I can't afford an accessible campaign, or I can't afford an accessible website, actually often it's an afterthought, accessibility. And we talk about playgrounds, actually there's only 1 in 10 accessible playgrounds in this country for disabled children. So if we're going to think about accessibility, we need to think from the get-go, because actually when you plan accessibility in, it becomes more of a thought than a process and more of a budget. So I do believe that accessibility can be vital for everybody within their lives. So when we start thinking about accessibility for visually impaired people, it actually works for people who are older. If we think about people whose first language isn't English, actually people who have a learning impairment, that really helps. So when we think about accessibility not as an afterthought, it actually becomes part of a process rather than a budget.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think that really, you mentioned there within your response that it was sort of, something that's really thoughtful instead of just a process. And that reminds me of what was Jeanette's kind of fairly intriguing myth, was to, not trust the process. Jeanette, please, can you elaborate? Tell us a bit more about what you meant by that.
Yeah, sure. I was actually just thinking, that sort of leads me on to what I was reflecting on as I was preparing for this. You see, for me, I think exclusion happens when our kind of individual experiences interface with institutions, and institutions are quite complex, but one of the things that is really common to them is process. I think that kind of process piece, sometimes we kind of create this umbrella which says, okay, the process is there to protect people and to make sure that they have positive experiences. And often when you start to talk about needing to include people, people say, oh, just trust the process, it will be inclusive. I actually think that we should be testing our processes, and that we should be testing our processes with people rather than trusting our processes, because quite often the processes aren't designed with people in mind, and they can be alienating, and they can cause people to feel marginalized. So that was my thought about quite often, you're in a situation, particularly, in a large organization. I mean, I work for a large organization. My job is to test our processes so that they can be more inclusive. But you do find this kind of refrain. Oh, no, it's okay. I know you've seen that there's something that's not working, but trust the process. It will kind of come through. And I just don't think it works that way.
Yeah, so interesting. Again, a round of applause. I think we just to let you in on a secret, we already had a little bit of a meeting a couple of weeks ago to sort of discuss what we were going to say, and it sort of strikes me that there's a fine balance between having processes, having perhaps rules and regulations, like positive rules and regulations that come in to ensure that some of these long-held beliefs can be questioned, but then also that balance between then it taking it away from the thought process of the individuals involved if you've got a kind of tick box that you're following, or a rule or a regulation. Anna Marie, have you seen anything yourself in the work that you're doing where the rules or the regulations have helped, you know, perhaps to bring about change in sport for women and girls, or perhaps where it's still got in the way?
I think generally it gets in the way normally, because most rules from a sporting perspective were put in place when sport was designed, which was for men, 150 years ago or so, and we really haven't changed very much. I think, you know, I mean, I heard one horrific story recently that, you know, there's a lot of work going on at the moment around women's physiology, women's biology. The International Weightlifting Federation have recently changed their rules. So now, and excuse me for those, I hope nobody is offended, but it is, you are disqualified if you lift a weight and there's urine that appears, or you pass urine while you're competing. And this only ever happens to women because of the way that you lift the weights and you lift them in a single plane. Has a really bad impact on your pelvic floor. And if we don't have proper pelvic floor health, something we don't talk about enough and we don't help people with enough, you will pass urine when you're lifting an incredibly heavy weight. Of course, that doesn't impact men at all. So we're seeing these rules that are being put into place, you know, really without any thought whatsoever. And we just need to understand much better about women's bodies in activity, in sport and in activity, to understand what they can and can't do. And actually, I think, I appreciate what the lady was saying over here, but I think women can actually do a hell of a lot more than we think they can, because we just don't understand their bodies. The most horrendous statistic that I've heard, it is now at 8%, but until I think 2018 or 2016, only 4% of sports science and sports medical research was done on women. It's now up to, we think about 8% is the current estimate of where that is. That means there's a huge amount of sports research and things, and that includes all sorts of things around kit and things like that. So we need to understand much better, and we need to make sure that we're not making rules that are inadvertently not helping people to get active and making them fear being part of a particular sport. In general, I think it's the other way around. My personal belief, and I know that we don't all agree with this up here, is that actually legislation helps cultural change in the long run. Years and years ago, nobody wore seatbelts in their cars. When it became law and people stopped getting stopped, everybody put their seatbelts on, and now people generally will not go out, and they wouldn't dream of getting into a car without putting their seatbelt on. So I think legislation and those sorts of things can work, but I think we need to be really careful about the sort of rules and legislation that we make to make sure they're not inadvertently impacting people the other way around.
Thank you, Anna Marie. That's a helpful point. Sarah, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, legislation does work when it happens, but too often, especially in open spaces, things are voluntary. So the guidelines, there's always this word guidelines, especially for disabled people. There's a lot of things that are still voluntary. It's a nice to do if you want to do it. Actually, we cannot get our population active until we start taking legislation seriously for everybody, because too often these things are voluntary, or if you can do it, just do it. But we cannot get people active if people's are just a guideline.
Thank you. And can I just ask again though, Sarah, in terms of pushing on beyond just that legislation or that regulation or even that guideline, if it's there, how then can we actually really challenge some of those cultural beliefs? What's the best way in your experience of really changing the view of perhaps a group of people to be more inclusive?
It's very interesting because I'm northern, so I've got the might of the northerner in me, but I have lived in London, so I have had that experience as well. But people power is the way to do it. But I do also believe that for disabled people, there's not enough disabled people working in our industry at all. I know during lockdown, Eve will tell you, I had a lot of voice over the cycle lanes that people were putting in to be more active. They're inaccessible. So if we're going to build, we're going to build accessibly. We're going to build for adapted cycles. But actually people really help, actually being allies. I need non-disabled people to fight my corner. And we do need a lot more people to say, that's not right. That shouldn't happen in 2024. but also for disabled people themselves to, yeah, we moan a little bit, we criticise, we say things are wrong, but we've got to say when things are right. So actually, let's start celebrating the good, especially in Manchester, as well as the bad.
Fantastic, Sarah. So what I'm hearing from both yourself, Sarah, and from you, Anna Marie, is that it's not just about the activism, shall we say, coming from those groups that have been traditionally marginalised, but also the allyship from everybody, really, to sort of identify where these aspects of non-inclusivity can come in and to be able to speak up for those as well. And you mentioned people power, and Doug, earlier you were saying about some of the work around coming to solutions within the medical sphere, working with people.
Well, yeah, so culture is just so important. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think sometimes cultural attitudes can be incredibly negative. There's no Americans here, I hope, but if you look at American culture, they very much believe that something should be done to them.
Sorry, Americans are welcome. I should highlight.
It'd just be a bit awkward. So I didn't want to pick on any of our more likely coaches here, but they would ask for a tablet to fix something or a procedure to fix something, and that's a very negative cultural assumption. Now we're not like that, but for instance, the organisation I work for, the local care organisation, it's about trying to understand and work with communities and understand the strengths of a culture or part of society and try to work with them in order to achieve goals. And it's wonderful that we're not like a patronising, stop smoking approach anymore. And you see much greater effects and much more powerful effects by tapping into the things that the strengths that people's cultures provide for them already.
Okay, so really tapping into those cultures. Jeanette, when we spoke before, you were really also highlighting some of those, deeply held cultural trauma actually associated with the idea of physical activity, and sometimes that is in itself a challenge. Can you tell any more about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I was thinking about, because you asked us to come up with examples, when I was thinking about this kind of trust the process kind of question or sticky idea, was actually from a past role where I was working in London. And one of the things that happened, one of the really awful tragedies that happened while I was working in London regional government was the Grenfell tragedy. And I'm sure most people will know what an awful tragedy that was. But one of the things that came out of that as we had conversations with communities was this phrase, institutional indifference. And it was a kind of a way of capturing the culture that had kind of precipitated the tragedy happening, where actually there had been a recognition within the community that there was a risk that something like this could already happen, but no one had listened because there'd been a level of, it wasn't rejection, it wasn't outright discrimination, it was actually indifference to the voice of the people who knew what they were hearing and seeing on the ground. And I think that idea of indifference is really transferable to almost any part of human experience. And I think what I find when we talk about physical activity is, we experience that in our bodies, right? But when we start to talk about the traumas that we experience in society, somehow we can detach the conversation about our experience of physical activity from some of the traumas and oppressions that we experience in society. So a couple of weeks ago, Sport England and all the other sports councils got together to think about or work on race equity. And it was an opportunity for us to say, within the context of sport and physical activity, there are people who are racialized and minoritized who are experiencing everything that we know and love in a completely different way. We have to acknowledge that. We have to kind of front up to that as a sector and work together as people who have that lived experience and as allies to change it. So for me, there's something about having those really open conversations and recognizing that we can't afford to gloss over some of the lived experiences which are often, we just presume that people can cope, they can deal with it.
Yeah, okay. And And I think it's really telling to sort of bring out, it's not that rejection, there's not necessarily always a tension there, but that indifference can be just as exclusionary than anything else. Really helpful, Jeanette, thank you. Anna-Marie, yes, sure, and then we'll bring Hayley in for some reflections as well.
I'm listening to Jet makes me just think about, and going back then to the discussions about regulation, about guidance around whatever else, the recent government announcement of non-statutory guidance around PE in school, for example, doesn't take into account any of that indifference whatsoever. So really for me, it's almost worse than useless. Yes, of course, kids should be having at least 2 hours a week of PE. They should be having far more. But there should be something around quality of it. And the quality of that will be different to different children from different backgrounds. And actually what should be being tested by government, or testing whether that works, is whether or not they're actually talking to those children about what it is that they want or they need to make it possible for them to have 2 hours of genuinely good quality physical education, so that they do build in those habits for life. And I think that's, there are bits of, that sort of covers almost all the things we've been talking about around that.
Yeah, Tim, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, it's a really obvious point, but when we're talking about culture and the cultural barriers, it's, as a parent as much as anything, there's something deeply paradoxical about being in a society where for the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years of human life, we try and get kids to keep still. And then we spend the next X years telling them they should be more active. And that's a really deeply ingrained cultural and systematic barrier to getting people to connect with their own bodies and their own movement. That has to change.
Thank you, Tim. That's a really interesting one. Hayley, I'd like to turn to you if you've got any thoughts to listening to your fellow panellists, but also from your own perspective on this. And then just to forewarn the panellists, I'm going to go down the line again to just think of those seeds of hope, those green shoots you've seen of change, to get another kind of quick summary from each of you. And then audience members, we're going to go back to you for the similar. So just to be aware while we're listening to Hayley sum up.
About 1 million thoughts.
2 or 3 key things.
Yeah, I think I was shivering a little bit at the institutional indifference because I was feeling, thinking back over my career at times, that it might have been perceived that I was indifferent to the changes or the depth of the change that needed to happen. And it reminds me that there can be fear in this process, and perhaps it's a journey, but that personally and organisationally and as a system, it took my head to kind of thinking, well, first of all, there's something about having a belief and a depth of understanding of people's experiences and what's needed, that then needs to translate into an intention and a commitment to act and do things differently. And that isn't always easy, and it's never perfect. And if I reflect on, say, the first conference to now, like, we've come a long way, and things are a lot better than they used to be in these rooms, and they're still not where they need to be. And I know I've been guilty in the past of holding back through fear, really, of not being perfect or good enough, and that being getting in the way of doing something differently. So that's sort of resonated and made me think, how courageous are we, and how honest are we about what's getting in the way of us redesigning processes. And then the other thing that's really stood out to me and is in my mind, which is going back to the legislation point, is how many examples of where we've done small scale test and learn with communities in good ways that have then shown that things are possible, which then can translate into collective voice for influencing legislation or influencing change. And there's a number of examples that I've just heard in conversations outside today about where people are trying to do that. There's trials and tests and building an evidence base that shows that it can be different. And then there's collective voice for influence upwards. And that's the kind of the alchemy, I suppose, of the legislation and the community and system activism. So there are a few thoughts that I have amongst many, and a commitment to be more courageous, as always.
Brilliant, thank you, Hayley. If we just go back to Anna-Marie. Anna-Marie, just any thoughts just to sum up with regards to green shoots of change, or things that have changed that can give us belief that we can change these cultural thoughts for something more inclusive and more powerful for everyone to be active.
Yeah, well, we're all here today, so there's a huge number of people here who are here because they want to be here talking about being more active, which is a fantastic sort of first step, as every journey starts with. I'm going to stick with the theme of women because I'm here as IWG today, and I think that one of the things I'm really hopeful about is the increased understanding and increased discussions that I see happening, not just in cities around the UK and across different cultures, but actually in our media and more internationally around women's health and women's bodies, and making sure that we have got the right sort of kit. I was sat next to somebody the other day who said for the first time he had said the word sports bra out loud. He'd never talked about it or thought about the fact that not having a proper fitting bra would stop a woman from being able to actually be active and do sport. So there are discussions like that. There are many more discussions around menstrual health and the understanding of menstrual health and how good it is to exercise while you are having your period. As long as you've got the right access to the right sort of things that you need to be able to do that, whether that's a menstrual cup or whether it's a tampon or whether it's period pants or whatever else. So just having these normal conversations with people and being able to get teachers, families, fathers, brothers understanding that this is just part of the normal life cycle for women, and it doesn't have to stop them from having a life that's active. So I think that's happening, and I'm really positive about that, and I hope we can keep that momentum going so that it really is normalised.
Thank you, Anna-Marie, that's great.
I'll just build on that because it takes me back to where I started. It takes me back to the observations in the audience and it takes me back to Eve's tweet of her period pants yesterday, which was just awesome. I think there's just so much change that is happening in that space. I've written about my menopause journey. It's a roller coaster of a journey, and I will keep moving through it, and that's the difference, I think, as I found a way to move through pregnancy with 2 sports bras and a kind of elastic thing that I wore underneath my bump in the end. But that's what is changing, and the fact that we can sit on a stage and talk about that, I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago on a stage like this. So I think it is a really good observation that was made from the audience earlier, and it is changing, and it's really, really important to women's health. So yeah.
Thank you, Hayley. Tim?
Well, I was introduced to somebody who wrote a book called Urban Playground. The full title is Urban Playground, How Child-Friendly Planning and Design Can Save Cities. And that's the green shoot I'm seeing and writing about, is that this idea of what does better look like? How do we build consensus around what a better city, a better town, a better neighbourhood it looks and feels like, and seeing bringing children into the conversation, literally and figuratively, I think is a way of getting that long-term consensus. And there are cities right now, Barcelona, Paris, Tirana in Albania, amazing city, amazing things happening. And I just had a conversation here just before lunch about how can we make Manchester more child-friendly? There's a conversation happening in Leeds about the same question. And it's not just about flying the flag for the kids. It's about how a children's lens helps to build that stronger, wider consensus about what makes places work better for everyone. And I'm pleased to see that is beginning to get real traction.
Wonderful news. And Tim, may I just ask you just to bring to life that city in Albania, was it?
Yes. So,
is there anything you could describe to us?
Well, I mean, it's investing. This is a city that has not got a lot of money, right? We're talking about Albania here. Any Albanians in the room will tell you about the history, tragic history of that country. But hundreds of kilometres of cycle lane, urban forest, new playgrounds, and what it's stemming from is the mayor of that city almost sees the child as a symbol of that city's future, that it's moving on from a difficult and actually violent past to a better place through a collective focus on how that city can be constructed around children's health and well-being. And the mayor's very articulate about that, and it's really inspiring to hear.
Yeah, that is really inspiring. Thank you, Tim. Doug, may I pass on to you?
Yes, thanks. It's clear that getting people moving is a multifactorial problem. There's infrastructure, there's people, there's culture. And my green shoot really is that we are beginning to, the systems which we're involved in are beginning to work much closer together to integrate. So in my work, I'll work with physiotherapists and police specialists and people who are exercising for health. And that's something that's completely new and different. And the progress is very much exponential. There's better integration and hopefully better energy in this field and trying to get people moving.
That's great. And I think we mentioned before when talking with your colleague Sohail around the growing recognition by not just doctors and other medical professionals, but by people themselves, that things like being physically active is supportive of their mental health, which that connection hasn't quite been made so strongly before the COVID-19 pandemic.
Of course, and doctors need to not be part of the problem. We don't want to over-medicalise things like sadness or loneliness into depression and anxiety and try to use medicines and tablets when very often the difference it can be things like moving more and more integration with their local society, local culture and local community.
Wonderful, thank you, Doug. Jeanette, a last thought from you.
Oh gosh, lots I could say. I think the reflection for me is about leadership and where leadership comes from, because I think we often think of leaders as the person at the front, the person with the obvious kind of positional leadership. I think when we're trying to change culture and mindsets, we have to recognize that leadership comes from lots of different places and nurture leadership from every quarter of our society. So one of the things that I'm really encouraged by is the fact that there are now more conversations and a little bit more action about community-based leadership and about recognizing and valuing community-based leadership, because I think that will actually really shift the balance.
That's great. Can you say anything about what it takes to really get that community-based leadership? You know, how is there anything that you've seen that really really supports that?
Yeah, I think for me it's about being more relational and less transactional in building bonds between, building connections between institutions and communities and individuals, recognizing that it's not always going to be about a kind of quick win. It's about building trust and building a real understanding of people's experiences. And also recognizing the value of what people bring so that you're not extractive in that process.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Fantastic. Sarah.
I was thinking about this last night and I thought 20 years ago when I first started in the business, I know I don't look that old, but I mean, everybody would say, oh, I need a disabled person for a panel. Where's Danny Gray Thompson today? So actually, I've given Tanny a break and but there are more disabled people now working at every level, and hey, not all of us are Paralympians. So it's great to see that actually we can really influence change at every level and also have non-disabled allies too.
Wonderful, thank you. So yeah, please a big round of applause for our panellists. And I've just left enough time to not allow the slides to click on. I believe if you go back to the Menti, or again turn to your person next to you, that we've still got enough time to answer the question, you know, what are you taking away from this conversation? Perhaps what might you do or think differently as a result of having listened to this, or any of the thoughts that you've been having during the conference today with regards to shifting some of those sticky beliefs into something which is a little bit more positive and hopeful. So I don't think it's going to move on, but if anyone's on the Menti, can you just tell me, can you see the next question? Yeah, so go ahead and write that, and I'll go and chat to the tech people and see if we can get that final word cloud to come up. Here we are.
There you go.
So we've got where my active soul's coming through, wear better rainwear, excellent. There's no such thing as bad weather. Think fitter. Yeah, really thinking about the breadth of accessibility there. We've got 45 responses, and I'm sure there's not that many there, so we'll see if they're just coming up on the next slide. No, they're not. So I think this is the front page of those comments, but you can see on the top left there that the responses are ticking up, so we're going to have lots of lovely responses to look through later. So we're just coming up to the hour. So the last thing for me to do is to thank you as the audience for your attentive listening and participating in the Menti there, and then also to thank my panelists for a really stimulating conversation. It's really been thought-provoking to think about not just what those cultural beliefs are, but the different things that we can do to shift them. And I'll just hark back to what Hayley said there, is that balance between the rules and the regulation, but also the listening, the involvement of the people who are really at the heart of some of these challenges to actually be the driving force for change. So just like to say thank you very much for the time you've given us today, and thank you to you, your audience.